communicate your art. It just comes out of you. It's like the guitar is just a part of your body. The piano is attached to you. You know, the cello is you. It's like part of you. It's like your spleen, your heart, your soul. That's what a camera has to become. That's what a gimbal has to become. Because a gimbal is all about movement. It's almost like dance. You have to be really in sync with it. You know, it's all about balance. Like life. Life is all about balance, right? So let's see what it's like when I crank up the ISO and I'm just using a lamp to my left, and I have the white balance all the way at 2500. Using a mic on the camera, using my cage for the first time. But I'm curious what it's going to be like at this ISO, if it's just going to be noisy as hell or if it's going to look pretty good. I'm testing the capabilities of my Sony a6400. So anyway, I wanted to just check in real quick, and I wanted to talk about a video that I saw this morning that just inspired me no end. And that video was done by the incredible Danny Gewirtz, who is a YouTuber that I follow, who's taught me so much even though he doesn't know it. He's kind of a mentor to me even though he doesn't know it. He's a young guy, filmmaker, and YouTuber, but a real filmmaker, cinematographer. He's worked for like Nike and places like that, but he has endeavored upon a full feature film for the first time in his career. And he shared a video this morning, which was, I guess, part one of 4 parts of kind of a documentary of the making of this film. And I got to tell you, it was like worthy of an award-winning documentary. It was incredible. I was really inspired by it, and I wanted to share a few things about it because it's kind of making me think about where I'm at right now, which is what great art does. It makes you think that, you know, this is somehow related to you. And I don't want to make it sound like, you know, everything is all about you all the time, you know, if you're giving or receiving art. But I think great art is when you share a story and people can relate to it in some kind of way, like they understand it, you know, they feel that somehow it speaks to them. You know, otherwise, what's the point, right? And so, anyway, one thing that really resonated with me that he said this morning was somebody asked him a question in this documentary: why are you doing this? You know, why do you need to do this? You know, you really don't need to do it. You know, you're doing a lot, you're making money, you're very successful. And he said, you know, and this, I found this really interesting. He said, you know, sometimes when I put out these YouTube videos and I get, you know, great feedback from YouTube followers and stuff, I play it for my family and my friends and the people closest to me. And they're kind of like, yeah, that was cool, that was great, you know, but he said he never quite got the response that he wanted, you know, wherever that's coming from or whatever. He wasn't getting back what he felt he should get back. And I found that really interesting, you know. And then he said, so the reason I'm doing this is because I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to do something to get that kind of response. Like, I'm going to do something so great that they are going to respond in the way that I want them to respond to my work. And I thought about that, and I'm like, you know what? That's how I work. You know, like, every time I start a project, I want it to be at such a high level. You know, I want it to be like something nobody has ever seen before, like it's unforgettable. That's what I'm going for. I'm not saying I achieve that all the time, but I'm always going for something where people go, I will never forget that. You know, it was so inspiring, so kind of connecting of all of us. You know, like I'm always trying to contribute, I say, and that is what my intention is, to try to contribute, to try to form a community, to try to show that, you know, it's all of us, you know, like we are all together here on this earth, and we share a lot in common. And so you want people to react to what you do, to what you share, to what you give to them, you know? This is your offering to the world. And so I understood when he said that, you know, like I really got that. And so the other thing that was really inspiring about this video is that, you know, he has this gigantic crew. He's making a, you know, like a real feature film, you know, which means he's got literally hundreds of people working on this project. You know, he's got people with, you know, 1 million cameras, and he's got people dealing with scheduling and hotels and food and wardrobe and lights and, you know, locations and insurance and everything that goes along with making a film. And everybody seems so genuinely into this project. They're really inspired by Danny and his work, his mission. Evidently everybody loved the script, you know. I don't really know what it's about, but I know that it's a high school story, you know, probably a coming of age story about these kids in high school. Probably has something to do with his life. It takes place in Philadelphia, where he grew up. I found it really inspiring to hear from the actors, these young kids who were so professional and so excited to do this and so happy with the script and inspired by it. And, you know, you got to see them rehearsing, doing, you know, table reads for the first time. And it was just really, really, really cool to watch. And like I said, exciting and inspiring. The other thing that's really cool is Danny raised money from his YouTube followers. But what's really amazing is that the bulk of his budget is being provided by a guy named Matty Hapoya, who is a YouTuber that Danny learned from. And so I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that Matty said that there's a $300,000 or $400,000 budget behind this film. Now, that sounds like an incredible amount of money to the average person, to, you know, mostly everybody, but the truth is, you know, independent Hollywood films usually cost like $1 million at the least, usually a few $1 million. And so what they're doing is a monumental task, because they have professional people and they're going to be shooting probably for a month. So you have people's time for a month. And, you know, I know generally, you know, like sound people usually get $800 a day, DPs, camera operators, you know, usually the rates are $800 per day and up. So think about that, you know, if you have a month of shooting and you got to get editors and the whole thing, it's a lot of money. Food, it's a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of managing, you know, personalities and people's stamina, you know. This is a mind, body, spirit type of thing that, you know, requires a tremendous amount of energy to get something like this done. So I was really inspired by it, and also kind of thinking about this project that I'm about to do, because I'm about to shoot my second film. And my first film, which was called The Center of Distance, I shot it on my cell phone, my smartphone, LG V40, during the pandemic, because I didn't own a camera at that time. And I really didn't even know what I was doing, and I learned a lot from people like Danny. Like, I went to YouTube University, and I studied really hard, really diligently, and thanks to the incredibly generous spirits of people like him, I learned a lot. You know, I learned about aperture and white balance and ISO and exposure and focal lengths and aperture and all these things, you know, lighting. I learned so much, and I got it done. But then when I finished that film, I bought a camera, which is what I'm shooting on now, a Sony a6400. It's an APS-C camera, which means it's got a crop sensor, which means it's not a full-frame camera, which means it was a camera that I could afford at that time, and it was the best camera at this price. And truthfully, this camera has the capabilities to make greater content technically than cinema cameras from the past. You know, like, I could definitely create a project on this camera that would be technically worthy of HBO or Showtime or the movies that you go to in the theater or anything. You know, I can do that with this camera. It's got great dynamic range, it's got great image quality, it's got great autofocus, it's got all the things, you know. It's got good preamps. You know, I'm using a very inexpensive microphone right now, and it probably sounds pretty good. Even though I'm not even focusing on it, I'm just coming here to talk to you real quick. But I'm getting ready to shoot this film on my camera. And I was thinking about how, I don't have a crew. I'm shooting it by myself. And I'll just tell you real quick because I don't want to make the video about this, but it's the third part of a trilogy. And it's called This Is the End for Me. And that's the working title. I could always change it, but as of now, it's called This Is the End for Me. And the first part of my trilogy was a play that I wrote called Broke Wide Open. I wrote it in 2007, and it ran for 6 years. It was a 6-year journey, I should say. Wound up off Broadway. And it was about my adoption and my fostering and my adoptive parents and my family and my girlfriend. It was about my whole life. And it was about my very ambivalent search for my biological mother. And the second part of my trilogy was a play called The Red Plaid Suitcase, which was set to open at the Signature Theater in Manhattan in New York City on June 12th of 2020, but we know that didn't happen. And so what's really amazing is that play, which was all prepared to go, 2 years of preparation, I was, the most ready I've ever been for any project, ready to explode on stage, and I had such high expectations and high hopes for that project. I don't think anybody will ever see that play because I decided to make a movie based on the same story during the pandemic, and I shot it all by myself because it was the pandemic and we were all by ourselves. And I took this journey that was, perhaps the most remarkable creative journey that I've ever taken in all my years as an artist, which includes 40 years of being an artist. So now I'm shooting with this camera and these lenses, and I went on this spiritual lens journey, because lenses are not just about popping a lens on the camera and that's it. You gotta choose focal lengths. Do you want something that's really close in, or you want something wider? This helps you to express the emotions and the feelings and helps you to communicate the story visually, because it's a movie, it's not just words. So I went down this rabbit hole of studying all these directors and listening to why they use lenses and when they use lenses and how they use them and the different possibilities of lenses and the different creative ways. And I own a bunch of lenses now, and I have some lenses from my father that he had because he was a photographer and not a professional. He worked in the garment industry, but when my father was in the Army during World War II, he was a photographer. And I found 2 of his lenses, and they're both manual, old, vintage lenses, Minolta. I adapted them to my Sony camera, and they look beautiful, but they have no autofocus. They're all manual aperture, manual everything, and they have no stabilization. And this camera, my Sony a6400, has no stabilization. Now, when I learned that at the beginning, it didn't really mean anything to me because I shot with my cell phone, and my cell phone that I had, which was an LG V40, that didn't have any stabilization. But I bought a cheap gimbal, and that helped me a lot. And the footage was shaky, but I wanted that footage to be shaky because in the center of distance, the energy lent itself to shaky kind of footage. And I didn't really, I guess I was so used to shooting with my phone, I did a really good job of, some of it was maybe more shaky than I would want, but it just works. But with this next project, and now that I know, you can't unknow what you learn, I know that I have a lot of lenses that don't have stabilization, and I have a camera that doesn't have stabilization. And to give you an example, the other day I went out around my neighborhood shooting with my father's 50mm. And although the colors and the images and everything about it looks so beautiful and so special and unique, not like a lot of modern lenses, it's not quite as sharp, but it's got its own thing, like its own personality. But as you can see, it's kind of shaky. Like, we don't think that we're shaking, and I'm a pretty stable person, but we shake. And so I started to think, I need to get a different camera for this next project, because I've been using this Sony a6400 for almost 2 years now. I bought it, at the end of the pandemic, or I don't know, maybe the pandemic's still going on, but you know what I mean. I bought it like at the end of 2020. And it was really exciting for me. But now I have kind of mastered this camera. Like, I know all the settings, I know how to use it. I haven't mastered filmmaking, but I know how to use this camera, like the back of my hand. I know where everything is. The settings in a Sony camera, especially this one, are really hard to find, and they're really complicated. This thing is easy for me. Like, I know how to use it. I know how to get around it, no problem. And so I thought to myself, I should up my game for this film and get a new camera. So I could trade in this camera and all my lenses, and I could get like a Panasonic, which has great in-body stabilization, and then I could use any lens and I would have stabilization. I could control my shots. And so I started watching this guy named Patrick Tomaso, who's another YouTuber, another great filmmaker, somebody who I really respect and who I've followed a lot. And sorry, I'm just checking to see if this camera has me in focus, speaking of autofocus. So Patrick Tomaso is like a real no-nonsense kind of guy. I really like watching him. He's like, forget about image quality and pixel peeping and what has the best dynamic range. If you own a modern camera, you have no complaints, zero. You have a great camera. You can make great work with the camera that you have. However, here's some options that I love, and he shares his journey, and he also owns like 15 cameras. So it's easy for him to say that. So I'm trying to make this decision because I can't afford 15 cameras. I can afford one camera. So I'm trying to think what's best for me. So he's responded to me a few times. I've asked him some questions, and I was about to pull the trigger. But then I realized Patrick Tomaso is right. I have everything that I need. I have no excuse not to be able to do great work with this camera because I have a gimbal. Now, a gimbal is made to stabilize your footage. That's what it's made for. Because, like professional cinema cameras, like Arri Alexas or Red cameras, they don't have image stabilization. They don't have autofocus. So I have a gimbal. And I have a great gimbal. It's called a Weebill S, and I know how to use it, and I've used it a few times. Although recently I was asked to do a job for a friend of mine named Barbara Israel, and thank you, Barbara, for that. He asked me to document these artist workshops that he did in a middle school up here near where I live, and they were beautiful, and I brought the gimbal to one shoot. And I thought I was just going to get some really stable kind of footage panning around this classroom of these students. When I got home, I saw that the footage was still really shaky. And it made me realize, I think I know how to use the gimbal, but I don't. I have no idea how to use it. And so, let me rewind a little bit. Patrick Tomaso. Some of the cameras that he was talking about had great in-body stabilization, but terrible autofocus. Now, I don't really use autofocus all that much. I don't really trust the camera to do that. I like to use manual focus and take control of that situation. But when I'm shooting myself from far away, I have to rely on the camera to not only track me, but focus on me. And my camera has me spoiled because Sony cameras do that the best of any cameras, by far. And the Panasonic that I was looking at that had great stabilization, like amazing stabilization, amazing dynamic range, amazing everything else, they were actually more of a cinema camera than what I have. Their autofocus was not great. So I was like, that's a problem, So Patrick Tomaso guided me to a camera that would do both pretty well. And it was more expensive than this, another Sony camera, but I could trade in all my stuff, and, probably get a $2,500 camera for like $400 or $500. That would be a good deal. But I thought to myself, why do I need to do that? I have a gimbal, which brought me to another YouTuber named Brandon Lee. Now, Brandon Lee is like the god of gimbals, the king of gimbals. This guy is an amazing filmmaker and YouTuber, but he's a travel videographer, and he makes videos as he travels around the world, and he creates these remarkable short films. And I mean remarkable, like Francis Ford Coppola level, Spike Lee, crazy good stuff, really beautiful. And he really breaks down how to use a gimbal, and I realized that using a gimbal is kind of like my whole lens journey. Like, it's a very spiritual kind of journey. It's like the gimbal has to become a part of your body. It's like learning to play an instrument. Like I'm a guitar player, and so great musicians, they learn all the fundamentals. They learn how to get up and down the fret of a guitar, or learn how to use a bow if they're playing cello or violin, or they learn the entire keyboard on the piano. They learn how to use their feet if they're playing organ. It's like You have to learn all the basics, obviously, but then at some point you throw it all away and you just communicate your art. It just comes out of you. It's like the guitar is just a part of your body. The piano is attached to you. You know, the cello is you. It's like part of you. It's like your spleen, your heart, your soul. That's what a camera has to become. That's what a gimbal has to become. Because a gimbal is all about movement. It's almost like dance. You have to be really in sync with it. You know, it's all about balance. Like life. Life is all about balance, right? That's what a gimbal is all about. That's what cameras are all about. That's what color is all about. That's what lighting is all about. It's all about balance. You know, lenses, everything. And so people who know me know that I create schedules for like a year in advance with my work, because my work generally takes me 4 or 5 years of my life on one project. And so I went into my schedule and I added gimbal work every day, 90 minutes for the next 6 months. Now, I'm going to start shooting my film way before the next 6 months, but over the next 6 weeks, I'm going to do 2.5 hours because I want to master my gimbal so that I can take this camera, the Sony a6400, and any lens and work with it and still have use of this great autofocus. Even though, like I said, if I'm behind the camera, I'm manually focusing, but I do need this autofocus. It's really important if you're shooting a solo film. And I am, again, shooting all by myself, just me, telling a story. And so, Brandon Lee, thank you for that. It made me realize I have great equipment right now, and I don't really need to make many more moves with regards to that. Which brought me to another YouTuber that I follow named Mark Bone. Because the thing is, I have everything I need to tell the story, and it's all about the story. That's it. Nothing matters but the story. I learned that with my cell phone. I told a great story, and we made a great film. Well, Mark Bone is a great documentarian who tells amazing stories, beautiful, meaningful, moving, very complex stories in documentary form. And although he's a tech nerd and he talks about tech all the time and cameras and lighting and all that kind of stuff, all the educational stuff, he always stresses story. You know, who are these people? What do they need? Where are they going? What are they trying to get to? What are they trying to overcome? Where are they? You know, all of it. That's what's really important. And that's what theater has always been for me. You know, what's the problem? How can we solve it together? You know, conflict and resolution. You know, I'm all about like exposition, denouement, the development of characters. That's what it's all about. And Mark Bone is always stressing that. And so I realized I have everything I need to make this next film. I have my camera. I got a bunch of lenses. I actually have to add one lens. And believe it or not, I own this lens already because from my experience over the last 1.5 years or 2 years of shooting with this camera, I realized that 99% of my work I do with 2 lenses. I'm much more of a prime lens person, which means I only have one focal length, than a zoom lens person. Because I don't really like zoom lenses so much. I don't like to have to sit there and, you know, try to make decisions about whether I want to shoot at 24 or 35 or 50 or 70 or whatever. And so most of my work is shot at 35 millimeters on this camera, which is the equivalent of 50 because I have an APS-C, which is a crop sensor camera. And so I shoot at 50 millimeters most of the time, and 24 millimeters, which is a 16 millimeter lens on this camera because it's got a 1.5 crop. So I used to own this lens called the Sigma 16 millimeter. It's an f1.4, which means I can do great in low light, and also I can get a great blurry background. I can control the way the background looks. I can either let you see what's behind me or what kind of environment I'm in, or I could turn it into this creamy beautifulness and have you just focus on the subject, the person talking, or you know, something that I want to focus on in the frame, like if it's a lock in a chain link fence or something like that. I can cream out everything else. Now, I got rid of the Sigma because when I got it, it was one of the first lenses that I got, and I was still really inexperienced. And believe it or not, it was so sharp, like so incredibly sharp, and had no stabilization. It was like my least favorite lens, like I just couldn't use it. And so I sold it, and I actually made more money selling it than what I paid for it, which was pretty cool. But I realize now that I need that lens because that gives me that 24 millimeters and gives me the option to go low light and be more creative with, you know, what's around me. And so I'm going to buy that lens again. Now, I do own one zoom lens, and I'm shooting with it right now. It's a Tamron 17-70, and actually, I was kind of all wrong about this lens. Like, I actually am in love with this lens. I think it looks great. I think it's got a lot of character. I just don't like to fiddle around with too many choices. I know what a 35 looks like. I know what a 16 looks like. I know, in other words, I know what 50 millimeters and 24 millimeters looks like, and I know how to express myself in those ways. It's like a language that I've learned. And prime lenses give me more options, and they're also lighter on the camera, and it's just easier to work with and more creative. But I do own this zoom lens because I bought it after I worked with Baba, because I was like, I'd like to have a zoom lens that's really flexible like this, so if I do get called to do these documentaries and I don't know where I'm going or what the situation is or what's going on, what the location is like, anything like that, I have something that I can pretty much figure anything out with. Like, I could shoot anything with a zoom lens. It's not planned out. When I plan it out, I don't need a zoom lens, and this goes to f2.8, so even though it's really good in low light, it's not as good as my Sony 35mm, which is f1.8, which is great in low light, and the Sigma, which is f1.4. So for this film, I'm going to use those two lenses. And I have an ultra-wide lens, a Samyang 12mm, which is that like ultra-wide, if I want a special kind of shot where you want to see the horizon and have that kind of look, or if I'm indoors and I want to have that crazy kind of Coen Brothers look. I have that kind of lens, but it's a manual lens, and so I have to be really, meticulous with planning out those kind of shots. But I realize that I have everything I need. And I'm going to max out this camera and do the best project that I can possibly do with what I have, which I'm so unbelievably grateful for everything that I have. This camera, I've learned how to use picture profiles, so I shoot in something called S-Log2 most of the time, or sometimes, like right now, I'm just using no picture profile. I'm just using the standard profile in the camera, and the colors look fine. They look great. But I use S-Log2 because that gets the most out of the camera, the most dynamic range. And so I can get shadows and highlights all in the same frame if I want to. And I've learned how to do that. I've learned how to edit in DaVinci Resolve, how to color grade, color correct. And so I'm really excited to endeavor upon this film. My script is 90% finished. I'm probably going to start shooting soon. I'm scouting a location right now. It's going to take place in one spot. It's one day. The story takes place in one day. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to shoot it. The script, I would say that the film is probably going to be about 2 hours long, maybe a little less, but probably about 2 hours. I have Steve Peckman, who's going to score it again, who scored The Center of Distance, who, I say it all the time, he's like John Coltrane level talented. And so I'm unbelievably fortunate for that fact. And so I just wanted to say, I'm going to link all of these amazing YouTubers that I have learned from over the past couple of years in the description of this video, so I would check them out if I were you and follow them if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Danny Gvertz, definitely follow because he's making this film, and I think you should watch his movie because I think it's going to be incredible. So Danny Gvertz, Patrick Tomaso, Brandon Lee, Mark Bone. There are so many more who I've learned from, but those four guys are kind of like my core. They were like my teachers. They continue to be my teachers, and they don't even know it. I'm really, really excited to work on this film and use everything that I've learned and see if I can even raise the bar from the last film that I made, which wound up being something that far exceeded my expectations, Like, I'm not going to call myself an award-winning filmmaker, but I will tell you that we have won a bunch of awards. Best Indie Feature, Best Original Score. I mean, yeah, it's an award-winning film, which is amazing to me. Like, just crazy. So I'm going for something even better this time, in every way, technically, spiritually. With every project that I do, I'm trying to do better than I did the last time, because I consider art to be an accumulation of everything I've learned in the past, and now I'm bringing that to the table now. And then the thing that I do next, same thing. It'll be unbelievable. I wonder if this side of my face looks blue. That's because my TV is on over there, and it's the Google, page that I have a Chromecast. So right now it's blue. So if I look weird, sorry about that. It'll probably switch over in a minute. So anyway, stories in 4K ended, obviously. I thank you so much for watching them. I will do them again at some point. That was season 1. There will be a season 2 at some point. I might even sprinkle some in because I have hundreds and hundreds of stories to share. But right now it's time for me to focus on this film and honor it in the way that every piece of work that you create deserves to be honored and paid attention to. And that's what I'm going to do. And I intend upon doing the best that I can possibly do. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, for all the equipment that I have. I'm grateful to have the health, the mind, body, spirit that are all strong enough to be able to do this work, which people don't realize how hard it is to do stuff like this, especially solo work. I am a solo theater artist, but now I'm also in the film genre, world, whatever. And every project takes a lot out of you. See, now the blue is gone, right? Every project takes a lot out of you. And I'm grateful to have the strength and the desire and the breath and the spirit to continue to try to contribute, because that's what I'm really trying to do, to share. So thanks so much for following me. I'll be here once a week sharing my journey. I just wanted to share with you the people who inspire me this week. And I hope that you're well, and I hope everybody you love is well. And if not, my heart goes out to you, and please take care of yourselves and take care of one another. And onward we go. And I'll see you next week. Peace.